we have Alex Lehman, speaking of the tradition in the Berlin Phil. Did you want to ask your question about second flute players, or do you want me to ask it, Alex?
Sure, I can ask it. I was just wondering if there's any advice or something that you see in a good second flute player in terms of orchestral playing, and just looking at the Berlin Philharmonic and watching your concerts online, how the wind section moves so much together, and you can see you guys communicating. If there's anything you see in that, or any tips you can give that in the flute section or in the wind section as well.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's true. You're good observation. There's a lot of physical movement in that orchestra. It's a way of communicating togetherness. Sometimes the conductor makes a gesture like this, and doesn't mean you have to play now, right, with a stick. The reaction is very often afterwards. Therefore, in order to make it work collectively, we have to connect a lot. And I would connect with a concertmaster and with a principal bass, for example. That's a triangulation. My teacher, Nicolai, told me that's how they played under Furtwängler back in the years in 1950s after World War II. And then this is how they played, Jimmy Galway told me, with Karajan back in the 70s. Then I came there in the 90s, and Abado was conducting. It was the same thing still. So it was different people, but this tradition, this way of making music, of relaying the information within the orchestra, was still the same. And this, with these impulses, we convey them to our other fellow players. The woodwind, the flute section, but the woodwind all together. Sometimes if I have a phrase with a horn, I'll make sure that they can see the motions of my flute, so that we can phrase together if there's a little rubato or something. Now, what I expect from a second flute player, and some of them we have actually trained through our Academy program in the Berlin Philharmonic. Now, it's now called the Karajan Academy of the Berlin Philharmonic. And they come and study with a scholarship for 2 years with us. And whenever there's a position open, usually they will have a good chance of getting the job when they apply, because of that common experience that we had together already. And what I do expect first is to breathe with me. If we breathe together, we can be together, playing together much better. At the beginning of the notes, the ending of the notes, all that kind of thing. If we match the breath, then the music makes sense biologically together. And there's a lot of issues that are solved this way. Another thing that is important is also the vibrato. If we have long notes, or if we have things that go in parallel thirds, octaves, or fifths, which is very often the case, it's either or unison notes, we should be able to match the speed of the vibrato and the amplitude. Otherwise, it's going to sound out of tune if we don't match these kind of things. So we should be able to control and vary this vibrato. And of course, what we need also is people who are able to play more or less what's written. That's to say, not just the articulation and the rhythm, but also the dynamics. If it says piano subito, then to play suddenly softer. And to be, while we are playing, the difficult thing is that we have to listen in the same time. Do I fit in the context or not? And this level of awareness is something that we work on very hard with our students when they come and join the Academy program here at the Berlin Philharmonic.
Is there any particular exercises that you do in your practice to maintain such a versatile vibrato so that you're ready for anything in the orchestra?
Actually, I don't do this nowadays anymore, but I remember doing it while and doing with a certain beats on the metronome, doing 1, 1, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. To have a progressive, controlled acceleration of the vibrato, and then gradually going down again. So from 1/4 to half to 8 notes, triplets, 16 notes, quintuplets, sextuplets, etc., etc., and then gradually going down. And then I would do the same thing a little bit faster or a little bit slower. So this is how I just quite in a simple way. Actually, you can just learn how to control the vibrato. But I also noticed that in order to do this, you have to put the vibrato not too low in your throat. If you shake the air from too low in your chest or in your throat, then it's going to be difficult to control like this. If you let it go up a little bit like bubbles in your head, feels a little bit like that, then it lightens the whole process and it makes it easier to control. It's more a matter of where you send the air within the airstream in the head and how it hits the top of the throat and the palates and then comes down again to the mouth and goes into the flute. And all these angles in there create a certain circulation of the air that, to me, that's where the vibrato is actually happening. In my own research and my own experience. Now, I can't prove this. I don't have X-ray recordings of what's happening in my head, in my throat, and while we're talking vibrato. But if you know how to, if you've learned just by using a metronome, basically, to control different speeds of vibrato, then you will not have a problem if the conductor or the other players ask you to play with a lot more vibrato. For example, if you play romantic music with strings, they're used to use so much vibrato. You have to match that. But if you play chamber music and the whole line is with clarinets and they play without vibrato, you also have to match that. Or if you play with piano, romantic music, the piano doesn't have the vibrato that the string quartet will have. So we have always to see in which kind of context we are and to see that we're making the best out of it.
You know, since we're on a flute technique, we did have a question from Laura about tonguing. Did you want to ask that, Laura? Because that actually matches another question I had received from someone about our articulation.
Thank you so much. Always struggled with articulation, and it wasn't until I was like 27 years old that I realized that I actually stick my tongue behind my bottom lip and I tongued with the middle. I was so unaware, and so now I'm really 10 years later, I'm really trying to fix this, and I'm struggling. And so you just mentioned briefly that you change your tongue. So where do you put your tongue in your mouth? How do you adapt and change?
Yeah, well, I know it changes all the time. It's not in one position. It's not set in one position. What is important, I think, because we're not playing a lip instrument, we're playing a wind instrument. It's the air coming through the lips that's actually making the tone. No air, no tone. So if we tongue between the lips, we stick the tongue and close that gap. So the airstream is not able to flow anymore, and therefore there is no sound and there is no music anymore. So this is why we should avoid putting the tongue in between the lips as much as possible, except maybe for the very beginning, for the very first note, or if we want to have a very harsh staccato, to have an extreme separation of the notes. Because when we put the tongue just between the lips here like that, there's no air coming through. There's absolutely zero sound, and therefore it's really difficult to keep the music alive in that moment. I find I prefer to put the tongue out of the way, whether all as flat as possible inside the mouth while I'm playing legato, or to do an articulation where the tongue is just lifted and is kind of surfing on top of the airstream, if you want that, if you like that expression, and then just using the tip of the tongue going up to the palate or to behind the upper teeth, just to precise a little more the beginning of the note in order to achieve a precision work there, but without stopping the airflow. I think that's the most important thing, because when you stop the airstream, you have to put it in motion back again. And this is where you start having notes cracking. This is where the stop and go business is bringing in problems into flute playing, into the control of the sound and the progressivity of the articulation. So there's all possible between all the way down to the lower teeth. Sometimes I even think when I play double staccato, not right in the front, but rather like I call it a submarine staccato, putting the tongue as far back as possible, and getting the feeling that you're not doing the staccato with the tip of the tongue, but rather with the sides, the back and the sides of the tongue here. and then you really get the tongue out of the way, and this allows, particularly in the lower octave, for example, to have a lot more power while supporting the attacks with the tongue, but without sticking it out so that we don't stop the airstream, and therefore we can let the sound be a little more full and a little more powerful, but which is usually a complex that we flute players have in the lower octave.
Okay, thank you so much. That was fabulous. I want to get back a little bit to your life story, if we could. And I think you were 19 when you first won your first orchestra job. Is that correct?
That's right.
22.
That's right. I was 19 years old, and I was still a student in Paris. I had won a couple of international competitions, but having been trained by teachers who were also in orchestral jobs, I was looking into this, and there was this opening in Basel. So for a half-time part job, part-time 50% job. So I took this opportunity, and I could go weekends to Basel to play my shows and operas and concerts, and then weekdays go to Paris and study in the conservatory for another year in order to finish my studies. And then I went on playing there for another couple of years, took a 100% position. And after that, I won other competitions, and like the Geneva competition, and won the job in the Berlin Philharmonic, and moved into Berlin, and everything was then transferred, of course, at a different level. I was by then 23 when I actually started at the Berlin Philharmonic, and it was very exciting for me. There was a lot of new players also all around me, because the post-war generation was retiring in those years, in that decade more or less. All the people who restarted the orchestra after World War II were retiring, and it was a big change from the Karajan orchestra to the Vibrato orchestra. Now, at age 50, I'm one of the older members of the orchestra, and it's our job to integrate the new ones, to find new kids who are extremely talented, and integrate them in the orchestra, and make sure this is the future of our playing together. But so the audition process is done in front of the entire orchestra in Berlin. This is how it's done in most orchestras in the Germanic world. And every musician has a vote. The conductor, if he's there, has a vote as well. So there's no commission or no panel for the audition. Of course, the flute section, if it's a flute audition, is going to drive the whole process and ask for this piece, that piece, etc. And we do not have curtains or any kind of anonymous system, because in the end it's not anonymous anyway. You have to live with people for 40 years or 50 years and work with them. So it's better to get to know them right from the beginning, rather than since anyway you're going to work without curtain, why audition with a curtain? That's the policy here.
I think Nick Fitton had a question about auditions. Nick, do you want to ask your question? And then my question would add to that, any tips or advice on mindset for flutists taking auditions. Nick, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So my question is for students who have just graduated, or maybe people who are still auditioning on a circuit to join orchestras. What are some of the qualities, if you're sitting on a committee, that you kind of pay the most attention to or put priority on, that would either advance a player into further rounds or either eliminate them from advancing?
Okay, well, your question refers to different points of what it means to sit in a committee or on a jury. It depends what you're applying for. If you're in a competition, then it's a different situation than if you're applying for an orchestral job. If you're applying for an orchestral job, you have to get for yourself. If you want to be taken seriously as a competitor or as an applicant, you have to gather some information about what is this orchestra playing, what is their culture, how do they play things. Check out on their website or on their videos, whatever material is available today on the internet. What kind of music do they play? How do they play it? What is that they like? What do they have in the ear? How can I convince them I'm the person for their job? So this is why you shouldn't go to every orchestral audition and try to play the same, to give your best. No, you should always try to convince them to vote for you and to hire you. which is a different thing. Now, for an international competition or a national competition, or whichever competition, there we are looking for personalities. We are looking for people who are sticking out, who are bringing new things in their approach. And there probably, if it's a bit spooky in the way you know, doing things, that may not necessarily be a bad thing. Of course, when you're playing music, you need to play what's written, first of all. I said this before, and I'm going to repeat it again, and it's amazingly important, particularly if you want to apply for an orchestral job, or if you're playing together chamber music with other people. If you're playing with people who don't play what's written, then we're losing time, a lot of time, correcting these things. And we're not playing the same music then. It's better to improvise or to do solo stuff. But if you want to play in the collective, don't bring problems, bring solutions. Play the dynamics, play in the tempo. If you start in a certain tempo, don't rush in the 16 notes. Play the articulations where they're written, the dynamics where they are written. If you see a crescendo, don't play suddenly subito piano. Take the time to play the decrescendo, the diminuendo into the next dynamic. Again, same thing when you see a crescendo written. It doesn't mean forte subito. It means gradually, step by step, a bit louder. And if it's over 1 bar or over 4 bars, it's not going to be the same speed of the crescendo. So it's going to be a different expression also at the same time. And all of these things, when we play together, we have to respect. Otherwise, it's like, oh, nobody's respected and everybody's driving like they want, you know? There would be like a disaster everywhere, and there would be a lot of injuries. And this shouldn't happen this way in music. It's actually, we have to show a lot in orchestral auditions, a lot of respect for the text and for the people we are playing for the institution we are playing for. How can I help this institution play this music better? And then once you're in the job, you grow up together with the other guys, with the other people around you, with your colleagues. For the 40, 50 years that you're going to be there, or maybe only 3 years or 5 years, it depends how fast things change in your life. And I can tell you, I've been now in Berlin for 27 years, more or less, with little breaks. So let's say 25 years playing in the orchestra. And because we're playing every week with a different set of musicians, we don't always have the same team, except when we go on tour with program A and program B. But it's so enriching to have colleagues like this and to learn from each other and to see how they all try to match each other and bring this at a different level every time. It's fascinating, and I'm really inspired by all my colleagues, not just the conductors, the soloists, but everybody sitting around me whenever I'm playing chamber music or orchestra together with other people. I think there's a lot to learn from each other, and it's a never-ending story. I used to say when I joined the Berlin Phil, actually it feels to me like I'm still in the conservatory and still learning so much from every situation, from everybody, and it hasn't stopped. I'm still learning and still finding new problems and new solutions.